Within this year, Gunvolt has grown into a franchise I plan to keep following, blazing through the apex of 2D action in every stage, exploring its worlds and characters through side materials, achieving as many kudos as possible. I became a huge fan of Gunvolt by the end of June when I finished X1. I got hyped to play one more game and then work on a short little retrospective video to put out before Gunvolt 3's release. Ouch! Inti Creates has gone from a company I liked for making my favorite Mega Man titles to one I respect for their determination to make original, replayable, and engaging 2D action games. The original Gunvolt and the following entries were about Inti Creates forging their own place in the game industry apart from Capcom and their license-based projects, which is why now when they get permission from Sunsoft or Igarashi, you can bet Blaster Master and Bloodstain have that Inti Creates charm. Anyway, July 2nd rolls around and I prepare to play as much of X2 as possible since I was preparing for long hours at work in the coming weeks. Before then, I looked around on Discord, Twitter, and other forums again to see that a lot of people were calling X2 the weakest in the series. Now, I observed the same sentiments with ZX Advent, which I happen to like more than ZX1, so my expectations were mixed. And yeah, X2 is easily the weakest of the 5 major titles. I'd by no means put it into any list featuring bad games like Mega Man X6 or Sonic and the Secret Rings, but it fails to match the quality of the past 3 games for me, and much of the GV community feels the same. I knew before writing the first sentence for X2 that I'd have a lot to say, and given that I was always planning on making a separate video for Gunvolt 3, I decided this split would make more sense. A 2-ish hour video and a 1-ish hour video isn't quite as jarring as a 2.5 versus 30-minute video. I additionally feel more justified after my research because the development of these 2 titles were tumultuous and linked deeply, which is why today I'm looking at Luminous Avenger X2, Gunvolt 3, and I'll also delve into some other topics I didn't get to last time. Although keep in mind I'm doing the voiceover on October 12th, so any Gunvolt 3 DLC added after that will not be included. Hey, yeah, editing here, except I did rewrite 3 goddamn pages near the end because they changed the fucking ending on the Steam release on October 13th. Both entries have some mixed reception, even within just myself, which is why it's really fun to delve into them today. Now, if you have not seen my other Gunvolt videos or know nothing about the franchise, I'd recommend you watch that one first, as I'm not going to reintroduce terms I've already talked about. As I touched on a bit last time, Gunvolt 2 didn't have a rough development. Gunvolt 1's positive reception reinvigorated Suda and his team to start work on Gunvolt 2 with haste. In fact, Suda has described it like putting puzzle pieces together. All of their ideas were already in their minds, they just needed to find where it all fit. What made that an issue is that the team ran out of ideas for a potential 3rd game. A common way Takuya Aizu, the producer, has described it is that the Gunvolt team put in the worth of a Gunvolt 2 and a 3. Because of that, Suda had no good ideas for a long time. Aizu even badgered him for over 2 years about getting a dev team assigned, but he just wouldn't budge on it. Again, according to Aizu, unless the dev team completely agrees with him, Aizu can't really get the Inti staff to do anything, which on one hand means that whatever they put out is made with the absolute devotion and confidence of the developers, but Aizu had to just wait until 2018 for Suda to be ready for a small pre-production team. And once that team was together, there was a lot of problems. The desire to evolve is something Inti brings to every project. They don't want to release a level pack of the same game and call it good. It explains why Copen got added to GV2, extra playable characters in Curse of the Moon 2, or why 04 is a worse game than 03. So they didn't feel comfy throwing GV into a 3rd game and calling it good to go. Instead, Suda decided to return to a concept he had when they ported the Striker pack to Switch. He wanted the Switch version to have a unique new character, which was a sword-wielding unnamed girl. She got scrapped since the idea would have cost way too much time, but Suda decided early on that this girl would be playable in Azure Striker Gunvolt 3. So the usual gang of Tai, Aizu, Hatakeyami, Araki, and Suda got together on some pre-production work. And where it gets more interesting is with the non-fungible fallen legend himself, Keiji Inafune. For Gunvolt 1 and 2, he didn't do too much. He gave Aizu a few tips and helped with the press cycle, but he's even admitted himself that he didn't do too much. I guess the big one is that dashing was gonna cost EP originally. That would have sucked. But anyways, that's not quite as true with Gunvolt 3. Suda and Inafune had a frequent loop of new builds plus corrections for Gunvolt 3, mainly because many of the builds allegedly sucked. Inafune's best description of it was,
"It was like giving someone all the uncooked ingredients and asking them to eat it."
In that same interview, he went on an unprompted rant about PC culture and women in the media that neither Suda, Aizu, or the interviewer chose to follow up on. I know it's unrelated, I just don't think people talk about that enough. GV3's development took a turn once Aizu and Suda appointed the younger Hiroki Miyazawa, who previously impressed Aizu as the director of Curse of the Moon 1 and 2, as their action director. Suda needed more time for the other aspects of GV3, so Miyazawa taking over the part that just wasn't working was great for them. His ideas completely transformed Gunvolt 3. Like, GV3 was initially shown off in 2020, while Miyazawa was brought on in 2021. Looking at this first trailer, compared to the final product, is night and day. Kiden's initial gameplay loop was basically just Zero with a tagging mechanic, which kinda defeats the point of tagging if you still need to get close range. Around the end of 2020, or maybe even the start of 21, Aizu felt that Gunvolt 3 was just taking too long and requested Tai to make a sequel to Luminous Avenger X. And it is as direct of a sequel as can be. Still stars Copen, has a similar UI, kinda in the X universe, and almost got it right with actually maintaining one single support character with Kohaku. Now, with everything I say about X2, please keep that late 2020 production start in mind, because X2 came out in January of this year. To my research, X2 had the shortest development cycle of any Gunvolt game. I thought maybe the team felt rushed, but Tai has actually gone on to state he had a clear vision from the start. Additionally, X2 uses the same engine some of the team already grew familiar with during Gunvolt 3's development, though not all of them. Many of the programmers of X2 and Gunvolt 3 actually didn't work on previous Gunvolt titles. And if you look into it, this period of time from the end of 2020 to the end of this year, Inti was going full throttle. Much of X2 staff doubled up on Gunvolt 3, some small teams were tasked with porting Gunvolt 1 and 2 to Xbox, plus Blaster Master 03 in mid-2021. So after Blaster Master, they were solely focused on Gunvolt, a far cry from Gunvolt 1's production that consisted of whoever had free hands. With that in mind, X2's development was still only slightly above 1 year at most, and that does show in many areas. I'm also told that release date was ludicrously bug prone, but I played it at the start of July after they patched it and didn't run into any issues. I'm not saying it's bug free, just that I didn't run into any. And one more thing before I start X2, another thanks to the Gunvolt Discord. Since they liked my first video, they gave me the X2 and GV soundtracks I had issues finding, as well as the scans of the X1 and 2 guidebook and a GV3 art book. They're not as high quality as the Gunvolt 1 and 2 art book, but these like just came out, so just give them a little bit. Since I've already gone over X2's development, I'm going to delve right into the story aspects. Unlike previous games, I want to go through the whole story before any gameplay, because it's really not that good. X1's story wasn't as good as GV1 and 2's to me either, but X2's really didn't try. However, after quite a few comments on the first video, I will admit that I overplayed the faults in X1's story, to the point where I misconstrued it in the video itself. I still don't like it as much as GV1 and 2, that's just my own opinion, but there's more depth than I gave it credit for. For example, the bosses I critiqued have some hidden information you can find online that delves into how Asimov actually forced most of them to join the Falcons. Asimov's twisted desire after years of adept oppression made him force other adepts to oppress Minos, not adepts as a whole desiring that scenario. He even used Matil and the Cyber Diva's power to make weaker adepts not care about that oppression. This information adds a layer of sympathy to some of the Falcons. Rebelio and Bakuto especially, since they've only joined the Falcons and done crime to protect their families from harm. I won't forgive Stella though. She's a capitalist. It's to the point where only Cream and debatably Isola are all that bad. Copen is also decidedly more chill towards most adepts in X. I think I got a bit blinded by the end where his bloodlust came back out, but for a majority of the game, he acts more diplomatic towards his enemies than he would have in Gunvolt 2. Even that last act, it's not adepts as a whole he hates, just Asimov. He doesn't talk about killing every adept in this one. The only adepts Copen kills are those that prevent him from saving Matil, and that makes it easier for me to sympathize with him compared to his Gunvolt 2 depiction where he followed his guts to slaughter adepts, which some of y'all also defended Copen as having a change of heart in his ending, and he definitely is torn on his actions, but I don't entirely agree. Since he still chose the path he felt uneasy with, I can't agree with him. Copen is still stuck in his society-approved cycle that he is causing. Absolutely, I think this is an engaging engaging story, I just still can't agree with his morals. I won't defend to the extent that I misconstrued Ix's plot though, which is why I wrote over a page of corrections, because keep in mind I'm a very new fan and some things just aren't gonna sink in right. Speaking of, there's some other medium things I missed, so I'm gonna rapid fire that. The species I called Minos should be pronounced as Minos. Sumeragi never used any form of mind control until the final act. It was more like a dog whistle that made Lumen's music sound pretty. Sumeragi had to manually extract the Cyber Diva Septima from Xion's corpse, and Xiao's meeting with GV was after Eden attacked Quill in his country. By the way, off that, it's kinda weird how they never state Xiao Wu's home country by name. It's a very Chinese name, meaning that it's likely China, Hong Kong, or maybe Taiwan, but they just don't state it, which is weird because they share that Zonda and Tenjin are Chinese, so it would make sense if Eden attacked him. Not really an issue, just a little funny to me. Probably because China is implied to be one of the most dangerous countries for adepts. Anyway, there's obviously a few other things I left out of that video since I can't squeeze everything into 2 hours, but those are the ones I either misconstrued or got flat out wrong. Most people left some well-written comments in that video, so feel free to read them. Hopefully I don't get anything explicitly wrong this time. Getting into X2's story, during the time since X, the entire Sumeragi, Adept, and Minos situation has been seemingly solved off-screen. Maybe there's still a tiny bit of issues, but all they ever say is that they're in a time of peace now, so okay. Blade is the new leader of Sumeragi and has used that position to maintain this peace and introduce English voice acting. Alright, real quick, I don't have the strongest opinion for this or GV3's dub. I can at least tell the cast for the main characters are passionate in their roles. It's just weird finally hearing them in English. I'm super appreciative of the English voice in Gunvolt 3 though, since the mid-stage dialogue makes a return, and now I don't need to slow down to read it. Anyway, X2 isn't actually about the world post-Emerzel. Instead, we open with a peaceful Kopin, Roro, and Kohaku in their apartment studying a blaster rifle that suddenly appeared. And yeah, that is the same blaster rifle blasting from Blaster Master. Kopin theorizes that the creator of said rifle purposefully sent it to him from another world. It then creates a wormhole similar to the ones from Blaster Master that isekais Kopin, Roro, and Kohaku to a desert where a busty robot girl named Null finds them. Suddenly skip forward multiple months, Kopin now has a new armor and weapons set based on the blaster rifle and has made his way to what's known as the Grave Pillar, where the rest of his adventure takes place. Right before you get in, you do get to fight a little masked robot resembling Kopin from Gunvolt 1 since he's got a little shield. Anyway, Kopin can't get into that tower until Null and Kohaku catch up to him. Only Kohaku can open the door as a human, since that's just the way the pillars operated. Now that we're in, we get to start the meat of the story, which is fight bosses, to earn keys, to unlock doors, to climb to the top of the tower, to learn its secret / fight the final boss. And maybe you can tell from that description, X2's plot is the most video game story possible. I mean, the setup is about one above Dragon Quest 1 or the original Zelda. And yeah, I know the setup isn't always the #1 metric for a story, but X2 doesn't get much deeper with this. I mean, Gunvolt 1, every stage is a Sumeragi-controlled base GV is tasked with terrorizing. Gunvolt 2, we go to parts of Japan attacked by Eden. X1, sometimes we go to an area terrorized by Sumeragi, and other times we go to their bases. While in X2, it's a stage in a video game. Don't get me wrong, the locales are nice and I'll get there soon, but there's no impetus besides Null said this is how you finish the game. And let's get into Null real quick. Null is what's known as a worker, a specific type of robot created by the creator to carry out a specific task. At one point it was to help humanity, but in the world of X2, humanity died out some time ago. So now they just protect this pillar created by their creator. However, Null has no purpose, hence her name. Now, every worker consists of a blank shell, Energeria cores that power them, and a special particle known as Pix that shapes their personality and outward appearance. Or to put it simply, they're robot masters with a little bit of more personality, powered by energy crystal from the Zero series and shaped by a particle like cells from Mighty Number 9. And that's not me calling the plot lazy, I'm stating exactly what they intended. X2, top to bottom, is filled with references to works related to Inti creates. The workers themselves, as well as the weapons they give you, are clear references to the mighty numbers. Though since there's just 6, there's no equivalent to Dynatron because electric powers is GV's thing, and none for Seismic because it just didn't happen. Although Seismic's ability is kinda close to the ability Kopin starts with called Anchor Nexus that homes in on enemies during a bullet dash. It's just that you gained Anchor Nexus from Rebellion in the last game, and it's carried over for a sense of continuity, not actually a Seismic reference. The workers have significantly significantly less going for them than the Falcon, Sumeragi 7, or the 7 from Eden. Every worker we fight can be boiled down to combat Reploid with a mighty number 9 reference. And given their tasks the creator gave them, I think it's a missed opportunity to also have a purpose that helps humanity like the classic Robot Masters. Like, I can't see a single point for these guys besides combat. It does at least keep Ix's element where bosses actually reference each other, with Brigade seeing Dacide as his sensei, while Vespa and Autochrome are sibling robots. The latter actually leading to their boss rush fight having them fight together like the one in 02 with the Beetle Boys, even maintaining the part where they fucking kill themselves. To get down to it, I'm not too big on their designs compared to past entries. The vague Mighty Number 9 references don't tell us as much about a character as the 7 Deadly Sins, Angel Hierarchy, or storybook themes did, made even more problematic by X2 and GV3's complete lack of multimedia projects. As is, their most interesting aspects are finding their other references, such as Ace maybe being a Quick Man reference with his boomerang and weakness to Time Stopper, the one I mentioned with Vespa and Autochrome, and Hale having fat knockers like the fan art of Splash Woman. Outside of bosses, references might still be in the stages themselves. I can't find a quote confirming this, but there's way too many stages in X2 resembling Mega Man stages for it to just be a coincidence. To list what I could immediately notice, Industrial Block has these platforms and bombs reminiscent of the factory from 01, Arctic Block has similar ice-breaking portions to Frost Walrus in X4, Volcano Block's Lava Escape has a lava escape just like Area K in ZX1, the final stage is a flowery land looking like ZX Advent's final boss room, and there is no realm in which you can tell me Vespa's stage isn't reminiscent of web spiders from X4. However, I could just be seriously reading too far into it. Keep in mind, half of these are rather generic stage types, where they didn't even bother giving it a real stage name besides Space Block, Laboratory, Block. It maintains the robotic automation aesthetic that X2 is going for, but it also furthers the gamified feel of X2's world. I will give the environment some praise though. I complained in X1 that each stage felt homogenized. Grays and whites overtook the color palette in most areas, making it difficult to point out what stage went to who in a single screenshot for me. X2 absolutely does not have that problem. Every level has a vibrant aesthetic that I can instantly pinpoint. In fact, if there's one aspect I have no split opinions on with X2 and Gunvolt 3, the graphics are amazing. Especially Gunvolt 3, but we'll wait before then. Based purely on aesthetics, Jungle Block and Space Block are probably my favorite. Jungle Block because I like X4, and Space Block because of course I like the purple space level. Look at the background I've been using for 3 fucking years. Once we're at the middle stage, we rematch the definitely not Copen robot, now named Ypsilon, and once he's defeated, he starts ranting about surpassing Copen to be by Mother's side. I hope that meant he'd burn down Nibelheim, but X2's story never fails to disappoint me. Ypsilon wakes up Mother, who orders him to kidnap Kohaku since she requires a human for her plan. So Ypsilon kidnaps Kohaku, sends her up to the top of the pillar with a transporter to meet Mother, and chose to destroy it once Copen and Roro catch up. All seems lost if not for Null deciding, hey, I know my purpose now, and stabbing herself with the fucking transport wire so that she can replace the transporter. This itself is actually a somber moment. Null's been with us all game, and now she's sacrificed herself for us. And not just that, it's brutal as hell. Her parts are fucking splattered, and this image becomes the menu screen from here on out. Some damn near horror shit, actually. A good kickoff to a wild final act that doesn't come together quite as well as X1's. After our boss rush, we get that traditional Gunvolt pre-final boss lore dump that we've become comfortable with. Mother is a supervisory AI designed by the creator to watch over not only the pillar, but the entire planet. After the creator and humanity died out, Mother grew upset with the remaining workers for acting as though the world is theirs since she thinks it's owned by her creator. Because of that, she wants to destroy the planet, but can't because her mission is to protect the environment. And only a human can override her programming, which is why she took over Kohaku's body. Well, the ensuing fight isn't hard once you figure it out. It's interesting that Kohaku Mother makes use of EX weapons from Gunvolt 2. Attacks our X-Copen never would have seen or know of, opening up more questions about what's going on. Phase 2 then has Kohaku hooked up to a computer while we swap between fighting the physical manifestation of Mother and attempting to free Kohaku. I also want to say that Mother's attacks are Mega Man references, but I can only point out 3. One looking like Frost Walrus, Copy X, and an undefeatable boy. She has a rainstorm move I could call Toadman's, but we all know that's the most bottom of the barrel comparison I could go for. Plus, I don't think Toadman ever fucking cried like that. Although this is the hardest part of X2 by a long shot on the normal difficulty. Healing from Gunvolt 2 returns after an absence in X1, and this is the only spot I ever used it in my first run. Anyway, once we save Kohaku, one of two endings play. In the normal ending, we see Mother turn into a beat-up Roro pod, describe Copen as looking like her master, and then Copen, Kohaku, and Roro enter a new portal home under the assumption that Mother summoned the three to her world. Kinda cool that X1's supporting cast comes by to greet our heroes in this ending, which I only mention because all four of them look like they were thrown in at the last minute. Blade even still wears her beat-up outfit from her time with Sumeragi, and it's an ending that's just so obviously a fake out, it just hurts. There is also an even worse ending, one that requires us to shoot Kohaku a shit ton of times before saving her, and if you do this, we get an extra scene after the credits showing that Mother has completely taken over Kohaku's body so she can stay by Copen's side forever. So what exactly is the impetus for this? Why does a Roro-looking AI want to be with Copen? Well, that's where hard mode comes in. Oh, don't you worry, I'll talk about hard mode itself in a bit, but story-wise, you need to find a secret room in the second last area to unlock hard mode and then replay the entire game from the start. Only change is that instead of fighting Ypsilon, it's this blue and white knight that reveals himself to have a face resembling Copen after the final battle. He grants us a program that revives Null, and then everything goes as it did in the normal ending until you beat Mother. This time, Null makes the whole area look all nice and pretty, and then she, Kohaku, Copen, and Roro watch the ghost of Mother and the Copen-looking guy, actually the creator, fly off to the afterlife. And instead of randomly finding a portal to get home, Null lets them know that Copen's weapon forged from the blaster rifle can open the dimensional portals on command, letting all four of them go to the universe of X, which is where X2's story ends. I know my synopsis might sound overly negative, but there's really not a lot here. There's next to no depth further than what I've said, and a lot of unanswered questions kinda just get swept under the rug because LMAO, alternate universe. For example, alt universe Copen is probably who gave us the rifle, but we don't know how he got the rifle, how he sent it to Copen, how Roro learned EX weapons from Eden, why Ypsilon got completely swept under the rug, and more aspects they left open-ended since there's no expectation to return to a barren desert wasteland. I saw someone in my comments of the first video theorize that maybe it's a world where Zonda wins, and I don't think that one quite works. If Zonda won, I really can't see how he would have made the pillar. If it were one or two open ends, I wouldn't really have an issue. Every media leaves something open to a degree, but this doesn't feel like a cliffhanger. I know they're not coming back to X2's world. Ypsilon will remain unexplained, we won't know why the world is in disarray, and how these combat robots are meant to do anything but fight remains a mystery. I can at least theorize, so I'll do that for a minute. For example, the Copen in this alternate universe, I kinda want to believe he's the Copen from Blaster Master 2's DLC. It doesn't fit together perfectly because that Copen is clearly a version of X Copen and this Roro has the Eden moves, but it's just a fun, silly thing we can talk about. And I wish I wasn't saying that about a Gunvolt game because the previous three are way better. X2 is just a video game story as Diggy is early Doug with an ending written like the bomb of a man. If a hypothetical X3 as Copen, Roro, Kohaku, and Null do more universe hopping, I can see some potential, but this first story only has a glimmer of a sequel potential underneath a story too obsessed to maintain its mysteries to form a fleshed out world. With that out of the way, let's talk gameplay. To put it simply, I'm not wild about what they've done here. What I loved with Gunvolt 2 and X1 is that they were even more accessible to those that played the prior game. Gunvolt has next to no change in GV2, and all of Copen's changes in Luminous Avenger are minor tweaks I welcomed. Despite keeping Copen in the starring role for X2, they've reworked his gameplay from the ground up. They maintain some aspects, while other integral parts have changed in a way that affects Copen's entire gameplay loop. One part of every Gunvolt protagonist besides New Copen is their idea of guiding their attacks. Gunvolt has his flash field, Copen has his ammunition post-bullet dash, and Kirin has what's called the arc chain once we get to her. All of these allow you to keep as much range from an enemy as you feel needed. New Copen technically has this, but it's nerfed to hell. No longer does Copen use his gun, the Border, and that's because he never actually retrieved it from Asimov in this timeline. He used an effectively the same gun called the Divider in X1, but I digress. Copen's new primary weaponry is this razor wheel built from the blaster rifle. It still allows the homing shot seen previously, but they've been nerfed as it's not how X2 wants you to fight. Instead, you're encouraged to use the razor wheel's 3-hit combo or air poke? I guess I can call it that. X2 wanted to make Copen into a close-range fighter. Unlike the past where close-range weapons like Tenjin and Stellas are one of your options to complement the homing shots, now we're expected to use close-range attacks more than anything else. And I'm sure of that because killing enemies with close-range attacks is kinda sorta the best way to rack up kudos in X2. What makes it worse is they nerf bullet dashing badly. No longer do you have the bullet system from before. Instead, you get one bullet dash until you hit the ground again. So, you know Copen's main appeal from before? Chaining as many enemies as possible before hitting the floor? Nah. Get up real close and slash enemies instead. I get that sounds crazy from me, who's a big fan of Mega Man Zero and also loves other close-range 2D action games like Castlevania or Strider. It's just X2 doesn't feel like it was entirely optimized to not use the bullet dash from previously. Slashing some enemies takes forever. The only slash that does a significant amount of damage is the third one, which just so happens to lock you in place for a longer time than I feel comfy with, or at least until one upgrade that turns the final hit into a short-range projectile. It hinders the flow seen in every other Gunvolt game for me, especially when it doesn't quite feel as though it's designed for it. And there's a reason, because bullet dashing is still kinda here. Once you hit 1000 kudos, Roro starts singing like usual and Copen gains a usable version of his bullet dash again. Big difference is that instead of having the bullet meter from before, he has a meter he needs to keep from depleting by striking surfaces or enemies like before. Absolutely wild that X2 locks us behind overdrive because it becomes a much more playable game once you have the old bullet dash. In X2's defense, getting kudos up is easier than before. On normal mode, the only way you can lose your kudos is by healing, hitting a checkpoint, or using your SP skill. Oh, by the way, Roro has her dark form during the SP skill this time, which I think is just a cool touch. The full removal of Prevasion and checkpoints giving you back your health does give you a good reason to hit them though, especially when you're getting very close to enemies to make use of the Razor Wheel, and thus more likely to get touch damage. Almost every change I've stated, I'm not too wild about. I guess replacing the regular gun with a close range combo isn't that bad, if it weren't that it actively fights against the tagging system. Copen's gunshots when tagged are mapped to the same button as his Razor Wheel, meaning that if you want to fast track up to 1000 kudos, you need to make sure not to bullet dash enemies until then. And do you see why this is annoying yet? Whether you are in overdrive or not, completely changes how you play as Copen, and the stages don't feel quite ready for both. Honestly, I have heard some people say they like X2's playstyle, and that's fine. I'll never tell someone something they're having fun with is wrong, especially in this case when I'm not miserable or anything, just baffled by some choices. The flow of previous entries aren't quite here. Or maybe it is. It's very possible I just suck at X2 since I didn't want to practice it as much. You know how last time I talked about how Gunvolt could have as many enemies on screen as it did because the flash field's homing function let you avoid needing to land every hit? We can't really do that with the focus on close range combats. It gets most annoying with shielded enemies since the on-foot traversal makes it hard to step behind them. It's just a lot of small issues building up that makes X2 feel slow, and the EX weapons don't help much this time. Instead of continuing down the quick weapon switch path of GV2 and X1 where you might need to switch weapons during the same combo, X2 goes for weapons more reminiscent of X4 or X5. And I know they're visually based on Mighty No. 9 weapons, I just mean mechanically. What I mean by that is a majority of the weapons are slower, requiring some anticipation before you use them. The ice weapon of the game freezes time and hurts enemies, the fireball requires an insane charge time, and this helicopter attack sends the player straight upwards, killing momentum. Even optic barrier, somewhat of our shield weapon, swaps between shooting lasers in a diagonal or a traditional compass direction, requiring attentiveness from the player when used in tight situations. Though even in combat, I'm hesitant to use them pre-overdrive since they only give kudos when you're in the air, and even then, I felt that it sometimes just decided not to do that, like with the fireball. I wanted to end this part with something nice, so I wrote in my notes that the weapons in X2 interact with stages similarly to Mega Man X, but after thinking about it more, it's really just the fireball that melts ice and burns greenery, the quick boomerang that can snag hidden goodies, and extra direct vertical reach from the propeller. When the Razor Wheel hits the floor in some stages, it leaves damage, and that's pretty cool. Okay, whatever, it's time to talk about the two screaming whiny issues in X2 that everyone knew were coming. First up, the DLC. In previous Gunvolt entries, and really just a majority of Inti projects, they've avoided scummy DLC practices. GV2's bonus stages were initially DLC, though now they're included in any re-release. And then X1 had just one extra hard boss against Blade and an extra Roro costume as $2 each. Even moving to Blaster Master 0, 1, and 2, they added full new character DLCs and only sold them for $2 a pop. no scummy decisions in past games. X2 has scummy decisions. We have 5 DLC boss characters that also give you a new passive ability when you beat them, including Jason from Blaster Master, Karona from Galgun, Kiden from Gunvolt 3, and 2 new characters named Kohaku Otori and Yang Yumo from games I hadn't heard of, called Kogan and Dusk Diver, both of which I'm interested in now, so I went ahead and added them to my wish list on various platforms. I didn't buy these for one very easy to explain reason. This price is fucking ridiculous. $4 each for Karona and Kiden, which is already more than I'm comfy with, and then the other 3 are $8 each. So that's $32 put together for a few bosses. For reference, X2 is $25 on its own. That pricing is insane. I get that maybe there's some cuts Inti had to give to the crossover companies, hence why Kiden and Karona are cheaper, but that shouldn't have come out of the player's pockets. Especially not when, get ready for this wild one, beating Yang Yumo gives you the ability to use Copen's old bullet dash before reaching 1,000 kudos. I am so fucking close to buying just her, since everyone says it makes the game better. It's just, man, $8 for a boss? Like, I get it, that's a medium quality fast food meal. I just think I'd rather use it on the fast food. Everyone else's abilities are a bit more passive or buffs that seem neat. I'm just not in any desire for them since X2 is already fairly easy due to the healing, checkpoint, and kudos changes. Except for the aspect of X2 people hate more than the DLC. I glanced over this in the story section, and now it's time to reiterate. To see the true ending, you have to beat X2 on hard mode. Beating a Gunvolt game typically isn't that hard. Provision, equipment, a fair skill curve, infinite lives, SP skills, and HP level ups make it so even if you reach a roadblock, you can practice as much as needed. And if you want it to be harder, you can remove one or more of those aspects. And even with self-made stipulations, Gunvolt and Copen's combat styles leave you with a lot of options for how to get around. And I want to really stress the self-made part because other Gunvolt games don't have many explicit difficulty options. For score, there's the kudos options I've mentioned a few times, as well as equipment that increases kudos gain that I didn't mention last time because I just didn't know about it, but I corrected myself early. Take that, guys. The actual difficulty changes are ones you put on yourself. Those you can slowly introduce to your replays. Of course, runner mode takes away a few of those at once, but it's not that bad since GV and Copen maintain their versatility with the 4 most useful SP skills and all of Copen's EX weapons. I wish the DLC stages were playable in the main story, but that's a minor gripe. The one and only difficulty apart from the initial 3 games I wasn't crazy about was the hard and easy modes in Gunvolt 1. Easy mode increased any meter recovery, made Pervasion absolutely permanent, kudos are locked to Gutslets mode, and you do more damage. While hard mode removes all SP skills, removes EXP, lowers your health to where you die in about 2 hits, spikes and lava insta-kill now, kudos is on Fearless, Pervasion instantly sets you to overheat, and EP recharge moves at a snail speed during recharge. To balance that, it makes your flash field deal significantly more damage, and kudos bonuses are doubled. I get why people enjoy the latter, since the big number dopamine makes my brain go hee-hoo, though I'm not heartbroken that it's locked to GV1. I have more fun mastering normal mode at the moment, though maybe if I feel confident about a no-hit run, I'll give it another shot. So X2, imagine if that mode was required for the true ending, but you're nerfed even more. Copen doesn't deal more damage, kudos are gained at the same rate, every boss has completely changed patterns, absolutely no added abilities, healing is gone, and the big one, limited lives. Every Gunvolt game up to this point has given you unlimited lives. I didn't feel the need to bring it up until now since I really only died at final bosses or EX stages we'd see in Gunvolt 1 and X1. X2's hard mode gives you 3 lives per stage. And honestly, beating a stage isn't atrocious or anything, except it kinda is. We're on Fearless kudos again. Gunvolt 1's hard mode locking you to Fearless wasn't too bad. X2 though, that means you can't make use of bullet dashing unless you never get hit. Not only that, this is the Gunvolt game where you have to get super close to enemies to gain kudos. And boy, let's talk about them bosses. Since boss patterns and weaknesses changed, practice from normal mode doesn't carry over. You can't even practice too much on them since after 3 tries, it's back to the start. And even if you make it to the boss with overdrive, 1 hit and that shit's gone. So more likely than not, you gotta win without overdrive, or be an absolute god at X2, or pick skill issues mode. That's the most valid option. Yeah, so a bit after release, Inti realized that X2's hard mode was too fucking ridiculous ridiculous and added in an assist mode that brings back healing and gives you 99 lives. If you're playing hard mode for any reason other than to flex your nuts, just turn this on. I will not judge you. I added a secondary stipulation to myself to never use healing so I could feel a little better about myself, but even then I had to give it in at the final boss. Hard mode just exhausted me, especially when I played all 5 previous games directly before X2 and attempted a hard mode run up until Ypsilon, and that was longer than my main playthrough. It's honestly probably a good thing I took a break to make that first video before I played GV3, because if I played it release day, I imagine my exhaustion would have bled there too. And that sentiment is kind of how I feel about X2 as a whole. It's only a little longer than X1 on normal mode, and it's not really that bad besides hard mode and the DLC shit, but I was just done after finishing it. I see so much potential here story-wise and with the Razor Wheel, but X2 just didn't quite stick the landing for me. Obviously, it had a quick turnaround. Tai was asked to make it at the end of 2020, and it released at the start of 22. 1 year of dev time at the most. And in all fairness, it's not bad for that amount of time. Unlike X6 or Castlevania The Adventure, I'll likely come back to play this for reasons other than needing footage or laughing with friends. It's just that this squarely fits as the weakest Gunvolt game besides Mighty Gunvolt for me. Alright, now before we get to Gunvolt 3, I want to talk about music in Gunvolt. Gunvolt's music is actually an integral part of its narrative, marketing, and digesting its budgets. So let's start with how much music there is. Besides 3 since it just came out, every Gunvolt game has had at least the full soundtrack featuring every instrumental track and the in-game Lucifer the Idol songs, secondary albums featuring the full versions of the J-pop songs, as well as instrumental versions of the J-pop songs spread across some of the audio dramas. For some oddball releases, there's an extra album with a arranged version of Roro's X songs and another Lumen album with just completely original songs. For anyone who's a curious music nerd, not really myself, I'm horrible with retaining music knowledge, the main soundtracks come with little booklets containing blurbs by those that worked on the music and some by other staff members. Some booklets explain the thought process for every song and some short character profiles. Oh, by the way, Gunvolt 1's OST booklet actually had the story where Copen got his dad's gun. I knew I read it firsthand somewhere, I just needed to find it. Something I find special about Inti in terms of indie studios is that they have their own sound unit named Triple I. Ippo Yamada leads that team and Gunvolt soundtracks. And if he sounds familiar to some of you, that's because he composed the soundtracks for the Mega Man 0 and ZX series, and Gun Baku 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 Adventure. I can't go over everyone who worked on the sound of Gunvolt because it's a lot, so I'll just say the ones worth noting. So while Ippo Yamada was still the sound producer for all entries, Ryo Kawakami ended up composing a majority of the songs in Gunvolt 2 and the X series, even heading sound production for both X's. The composer's main goal with stages was to make sure that each song matches the boss you were about to face. Some of my favorite examples are Merrick's theme that has a slow build-up to a mysterious atmosphere to indicate his laziness, Gaudi's theme with its American DJ aesthetic that sounds like it would fit well in DDR, and jumping ahead here, Kamen's theme from Gunvolt 3 that mixes traditional Japanese folk sounds with electronic rhythm. Speaking of characters, miscellaneous songs from main themes to menus also changed whether you were Copen or Gunvolt. Gunvolt having a fast-paced, easy rhythm common in Gunvolt 1, while Copen in GV2 had a underground machines about to blow type vibe. Like most long-running series, Gunvolt has a series of leitmotifs throughout the games, the ones you'll likely notice the most being the ones heard in Xion and Gunvolt's themes. Someone else online by the name of Mailman already compiled some into a nice video that'll show you examples better than I could explain, so I'll link it in the description. Now where production got wild is with the vocal tracks. While still composed by Triple I members, outside artists did the arrangements, lyrics, and obviously vocals of every track. Kaito Akiyama, going by her stage name Hako Factory, wrote the lyrics for every single song, while a different mix of outside artists that all seem to have rhythm game or shmup histories were assigned to a single character for arrangement. For example, Rodo and Lumen songs don't have the same person on arrangements. For the vocalist, that's also when it gets interesting. Megu Sakuragawa as Lumen has your typical beautiful pop artist voice. She's easy on the ears, pumps you up during gameplay, and actually has some good range that you can hear in the Butterfly's Journey CD, since that one wasn't composed for a game. As an idol used by Sumeragi to appeal to a general audience, this works great. Now Roro gets different even depending on the universe. In Gunvolt 2, Yorika Endo performed as Roro with a heavy synthesized sound. All her songs had auto-tune emphasizing her robotic nature. Since she was copying Xion through the Cyber Diva Shard, a majority of her songs were robotic covers of Xion songs in Gunvolt 2, which I think works well. Now, between Gunvolt 2 and X1, Endo retired from the entertainment industry for health reasons, as did Copen's original voice actor to find other lines of work. Mayu Mineta, also a small name, took over as Roro and Ix onwards, and so they took this chance to totally change her music and its purpose. While in Gunvolt 2, only Copen and whoever he killed would hear Roro's songs, in the Ix universe she's become an underground pop star that appeals to Minos, giving them hope in their bleak times. They've also dropped the auto-tune in Ix, maybe because Copen patched it, but I'm guessing it's actually because they didn't want to only have auto-tune versions of the new tracks. Now, if you really like these songs, you can try to see them live in person, or just straight up watch videos online. You see, Inti went out of their way to produce both live action music videos and CG concerts for some of Roro and Lumen's songs, which is honestly crazy. It's a ridiculous thing, I'm glad they did. Especially the ones leading up to Gunvolt 3 that had full sets and everything, which I guess is a good time to jump into it. Gunvolt 3's reception has been mixed to say the least. I enjoyed my experience with it, though it does have some flaws, mainly in the story department. I also understand that there's a piece of DLC coming out in December taking place after its ending that could possibly add story significance. Some of y'all even suggested I postpone this video for that, but I actually wrote out my video schedule very rigidly before that announcement, so moving this all the way to December just isn't feasible. Although I should say I'm not quite as negative towards GV3 as most longtime fans I've talked to. I'd assume just getting into the series this past summer plays a heavy part in that. I didn't wait 6 years from Gunvolt 2 for this game. It came out 2 months after I started Gunvolt 1, and I played it on October 3rd through the 5th. There was a longer gap between finishing X2 and starting GV3 than there was between starting Gunvolt 1 and Gunvolt 3's actual release date. And just like X2, I do feel that there's some potential it didn't tap into that we'll get to down the line. Gunvolt 3 is a soft reboot of the series, taking place a few decades into the future. They're vague on that number, but since they never used the word century, I'm kinda thinking 90 years in my head. We begin with a new character named Kirin attempting to break into a Sumeragi building so she can find what's known as the Primal Dragon. Kirin works for an organization known as Shadow Yakumo, a group as old as Sumeragi that makes use of mystic arts like fortune-telling, talismans, and short shorts to secretly deal with supernatural problems. They're also the ones who manufactured and gifted the glaives to Sumeragi, as long as they can maintain input about their usage. I think as a character, Kirin is fun. She's kinda your typical tomboy anime girl character, which is at least a fun trope to me. For Kirin's raid on Sumeragi, it's probably my favorite intro stage in the series. Like, yeah, I know, intro stages aren't the hill to fight people over, but it's so cool. She rides in on a motorcycle, crashes into and technically doesn't kill multiple Sumeragi soldiers, runs past some traditional Buddhist statues that shoot lasers, and it ends by fighting a blue dragon that's about to eat a Sumeragi brass. Since every intro stage begins with Sumeragi higher-ups getting fucked over. Speaking of that dragon, he's hidden deep underground in Sumeragi's research center, kept at bay by 1,000 glaives. Now wait a minute, where have I heard that one before? As it turns out, Kirin isn't here to kill the dragon, she doesn't kill, but instead seal his power with some talismans and a schoolyard peck on the cheek, showing us that it's actually Gunvolt himself. Sometime after Gunvolt 2, probably 3 or 4 years since GV looks a little older, though that could just be the art style change, Gunvolt's powers awakened to a new level he couldn't control. He went berserk and eventually turned into what's the first of what's known as primal dragons. As he could feel this problem rising, he turned to Sumeragi to lock him up with the glaives, freezing his aging process and allowing him to still exist in a sequel with a time gap. After Kirin uses her Septima, known as the Radiant Feathers, which allows for sealing, Gunvolt turns into a dog, who I'll be calling Dogvolt, and accompanies Kirin throughout the rest of the game. So let's get to the full setup. While Sumeragi sealed Gunvolt away, they fucked up big time. GV emitted tons of electricity while he was in their basement, so Sumeragi sold that off to gain an even larger stranglehold over the energy market with their new Gunvolt energy department, which became a problem because GV's electricity had dragon radiation that turned some adepts into significantly weaker primal dragons, giving us the initial goal: locate and save the gone berserk primal dragon adepts with Kirin, Dogvolt, and a new Lumen 2.0 within a new branch of Sumeragi known as the Dragon Saviors. Let's stop and talk about this setup because it's kinda controversial. Gunvolt 2 ended with a couple of loose ends. Copen continued his crusade against Adepts despite his new questions about it. Nordy and Xiao Wu had that whole thing with the Cyber Diva pendant, and we're not entirely sure what happened to Eden, but we can presume it died with Zonda. Pretty much the only character that had an ending was actually Gunvolt. I get that he's the main protagonist, but his story potential didn't feel quite as wide as our other cast members, which is why it's odd that besides Gunvolt himself, not a single physical flesh and blood character from Gunvolt 1 and 2 appear. I guess I can get why we don't keep up with Copen. After his ending in GV2, the only real options for his character is to either have him go through a full redemption arc, or fall even deeper into his hatred.
I've reached ultimate assist.
Luminous Avenger already follows a mellowed out Copen, and an even further fallen Copen doesn't make for a likable protagonist. However, I still would have liked to know which of those directions he went. Now, Xiao Wu I still think has tons of potential as a core character. And like I said last time, they originally planned on Xiao Wu being a playable character in Gunvolt 2. Giving more reason to that, remember how I mentioned how GV and Copen represent a dragon and tiger? Getting even more specific, they represent 2 of the 4 Chinese sacred beasts. Gunvolt representing the Azure Dragon of the East, King Long. Copen represents the White Tiger of the West, Bai Hu. While Xiao Wu represents the Black Tortoise of the North, Xuan Wu, which you might notice the name there. So him as a player character would make sense. And right now, his motivations for locking up the Cyber Diva have gone completely unexplained, and representing the tortoise could also give a chance for him to reappear still young looking, because tortoises live a long time. But I'm getting too off track right now. Gunvolt 3, from the get-go, doesn't care to follow up Gunvolt 2's plot threads, so until I reach my final thoughts, I'm going to judge Gunvolt 3 for what it is, rather than what it could be. And what it is a passing of the torch story from Gunvolt to Kirin. Perhaps a reflection of Suda passing the torch to Miyazawa as well. Alright, an actual aspect of the story we're given. I'm not wild about Gunvolt and Kirin working for Sumanagi. I feel it undercuts the capitalist cautionary tales that Gunvolt 1 had in it. GV and Kirin's idea is to use Sumanagi's technology to find primal dragons and change the company from the inside out. They could have used this as a chance to make Shadow Yakumo our base of operations, but they chose this instead. And at many points, like to a sponsored by Sumanagi point, Kirin tries to tell GV that Sumanagi has changed during his slumber. I'm just not really buying it at this point. Our premise for the entire game revolves around Sumanagi screwing up big time. Not exactly their best foot forward, but maybe you can argue they've gone from evil to incompetent. Tossing that aside, Gunvolt 3's find and rescue primal dragon setup actually works pretty well to me. Gunvolt 3 continues the trend of having a narrative reason for splitting the stages in half, and this one does it the best. Our initial 4 missions follow GV and Kirin saving primal dragons, the dragons volunteering to join the dragon saviors upon their defeat, and seeing our team grow into a full squad. Every time one of the 4 bosses joins us, our home-based background changes to reflect the addition. Not only that, the chat function reflects this with allowing us to not only interact with our 4 new crewmates, but even witness scenes of them hanging out without Kirin and Gunvolt. I absolutely love this, and I should likely use this as a chance to talk about the funny boys. Like always, the bosses follow a theming for their base. Our 4 starter boys, BB, Cayman, Shirin, and Apollo's transform designs follow major arcana tarot cards, other types of dragons, and loosely the 4 guardians from Mega Man Zero. The mixtures they've got going is pretty cool. Shiron has a Naga-like slug legs with a magician's wand, Cayman's Hydra heads form a chariot ring around him, and BB definitely has the Grim Reaper look, but I don't know what a Nidhogg is. Oh, I guess it's this. Their transform designs follow this pattern well, however, their untransformed designs and personalities mostly stray away from that. Instead, each of them follow more traditional anime trope personalities, which, like I said last time, that's fine. A 2D action platformer does not have time to make their secondary cast the most well-rounded of characters. Jumping off of that, the Dragon Saviors are the most entertaining of any of our past bosses. They don't have any known dark pasts we'd see with Elise, Rebellia, or any of the Eden members, which I didn't mention last time. Pretty much all of them are fucked up, and instead lend into comic relief. For that role, I think they work. Having moments when Shirin decides that Cayman is his sensei since he's a manly man, or parts when BB and Apollo work on model kits, make them a whole cast and team with their own thoughts and relationships to each other. I really can't tell you what Xiao Wu and Quinn's relationship is, besides he lives there and eats her food. While with Apollo and Shirin, I know that they enjoy playing fighting games with each other on their off days. More than any other Gunvolt, I wanted to open the chat function, and I'm gonna be really upset if they throw away the supporting cast yet again next time. Similar to X2, Gunvolt 3 primarily goes down a close-range path for combat. Now what y'all need to keep in mind with that is this shit went through a lot of revisions. Like I said, Gunvolt 3's initial trailer legit just looked like Zero with an extra step. And at that point, I'll just play Mega Man Zero. She did also seem to have GV's flash field powers, which only shows even less appeal to using Kirin and throws my points further off track. In Gunvolt 3, the game I played, Kirin is somewhere between Zero and Gunvolt himself. Kirin's main means of attack is her sword/Buddhist Kakata hybrid, while her tagging projectiles are Shinto Ofuda/talismans. Her talismans at their core are the same as GV's tagging. Tag an enemy, then slash them with a sword to deal damage. Set the fire in the specifications. The 3 tags per enemy limit is gone. Kirin has 7 before any upgrades. Double tapping down brings them all back. Pervasion uses up 4 talismans that can only be recovered with the double tap. There's a meter under each enemy to tell you if you've tagged enough to kill in one slash, and you can angle the shots in 6 directions. Now let me say, that last one is a game changer, because swapping bolts as Gunvolt was a hassle, and this allows the developers to station enemies in more creative positions from each other compared to before. For the sword, you have a basic 3-hit slash like Zero, an air slash like Zero, an uppercut you can unlock like Zero, the spinning air move like Zero. Hey, you know what? The sword on its own is just like Zero. Kirin has quite a few options with the sword, but I'll be honest, besides bosses, you won't use them too often. What you'll use the most is her arc chain. How that works is, you set talismans onto however many enemies you like, and with the press of a button, Kirin attacks all of them. Kind of like GV's tags, you can decide if you have 2 or 3 talismans on one big enemy to kill them in one hit, or maybe 5 all around for an instant 5 kill on small guys. And right after she arc chains, Kirin has a chance for an extra jump so she can catch her bearings and keep going before touching the floor. You can probably guess this has to do with Gunvolt 3's kudos system. It's somewhere between Copen and Gunvolt's. Basically, you need to take out as many enemies as possible without touching the ground. First kill is a single, second is a double, third is a triple, fourth is a quadruple. Where it gets interesting is that if you kill multiple at a time, that means that extra kill is factored into the multiplier. So if you kill 2 guys during a triple, the 2 kills are multiplied by 3. It's a learning curve that implements a bit of Copen and Gunvolt's ideas. You have a little bit of room to save yourself like Copen, but you still need to have an arcadey knowledge of the stage like Gunvolt to maximize how many enemies you kill at the same time. Though you can't save yourself quite as much as Copen could, since you need either an enemy or these candles to save yourself. These candles are strewn about the levels by Shadow Yakumo, and are mostly meant for platforming challenges and to keep you from touching the floor. Although they don't respawn until you touch the floor, so you can't just go back and forth like Copen could. For what it is, Arc Chain works fine, though I think it makes Kirin's large amount of options questionable. Kirin has a shit ton of sword moves, but I never end up using them until the boss, since that's not how I maximize my score. That question does get answered easily once you learn that Miyazawa came up with the arc chain after he joined the team. Kirin's sword movements were implemented before Miyazawa was on team, so it's likely they left it in after the arc chain, just because they don't really harm you to be there. Because again, I much more use the sword during bosses, and I can imagine casual play would make use of it still. Or even the spin slash and uppercut I use quite a bit during stages, though not nearly as much as I would have in Mega Man ZX or Zero. Moving away, getting up to 1000 kudos causes Lumen to sing like always, with 2 little changes this time. First of all, Lumen's song changes once she hits certain kudo numbers, and if you don't reach that number, she stops singing. Not a big deal, but worth mentioning. What's actually different is that loss of kudos no longer happens unless you die. Checkpoints, damage, and Kirin's 1 SP skill don't reset it anymore. Instead, getting hit any amount of times locks your kudos counter. So right here, you have a lock and a number. Said number represents what equivalent of kudos you need before you can get real kudos again. And depending on where your real kudos number is, additionally decides what your lock number is. So if your real kudos number is 4000, it'll take more work to unlock than if you only had 400. Your kudos number overall also gets really high up there just due to every change in Gunvolt 3, though the score is balanced around that. I got S ranks about at the same amount of effort as I would have in Gunvolt 2, so it's kind of just about the big number dopamine making me go hee-hoo. Speaking of dopamine, let's talk about Gunvolt. Kirin is the main star of Gunvolt 3. You can beat all but one area with her, the stage designers crafted every level around her, she's front and center on the box, but they still got Gunvolt in here. However, GV isn't his own player character this time. As I said, every stage after the intro, Dogvolt follows you around. He doesn't do anything besides keep you company, but if you pull Kirin's feathers gauge up to 100% or more, you have the choice to transform into Gunvolt by holding down the trigger button. Gunvolt is fucking busted. He's essentially your devil trigger to save for tough moments or bosses. Since he's evolved to the next level above a Septima, he's been given a boatload load of shit. His basic idea is similar to before in terms of tagging enemies, SP skills, and how his kudos work, but just about everything is altered to make Gunvolt more powerful. Actually, according to Suda, and I'm not kidding here, he beefed up Gunvolt because he got worried too many players thought Copen was more powerful. I really can't decide if that's the dumbest or greatest abuse of power I've seen. For some of the additions, Gunvolt has a move where he dashes through and tags enemies like Copen, infinite jumps and air dashes, his own altered version of Kieran's arc chain, and one more move where he fucking tackles enemies into the wall or floor. That last shit gets brutal. You can even use it on bosses once they reach a certain point and they fucking explode. Holy shit! GV does have some drawbacks though. For one, the fetters gauge I mentioned slowly depletes as long as you're GV, and even if you transform back to Kieran early, the leftovers don't stick around. Due to this, I'd recommend saving him for close calls and boss fights. His SP skills also use up a shit ton of the gauge, which is why I held on to them until I was about ready to change into Kieran again. Possibly his biggest drawback, and this could just be a skill issue on my part, is that I wasn't getting as many kudos with GV as I did with Kieran. Looking at the current guides, I'm seeing people mostly using Kieran for score attack, so I assume my thought is correct. Gunvolt and Kieran's swapping style is at the very least fun. Linking myself across the stage feels exhilarating, and busting out GV empowers me. There's not parts when I'm playing the game and getting frustrated like I occasionally did in X2, nor are there any mechanics I felt actively fought against each other. There's one big thing that gets on my nerves, and that's the focus on air combat. I miss the floor a lot at this point. Staying purely in the air as Kieran and just arc chaining doesn't have the variety we've seen previously. Even with Copen, you'd find enemies of varied sizes within the same zone that require you to switch EX weapons and change your battle plan. With Kieran, your main worry is just mapping out your path in each stage. And in its defense, I think GV3 has some of the widest routing options in any GV entry, and it is harder to keep Kieran in the air than with Copen. But Kieran still could have used an incentive to use her sword. Perhaps the same one X2 gave if you slashed enemies quick enough. My idea, just spitballing here, is to give more kudos than a single ×3, but less than a ×4 chain hit. Again, I don't think Kieran is intrinsically broken, I just want to give my input on how to improve her for a Gunvolt 4. Speaking of variety, let's get into image pulses, where Gunvolt 3 shines. Kieran and Gunvolt are able to combine the powers of their Septimas to create a physical manifestation of an adept Gunvolt has seen in his past. GV's Azure Striker creates the image, and Kieran's Radiant Feathers keeps it from dissipating. Lumen herself is also an image pulse in Gunvolt 3. While there's no official reason, Gunvolt theorized that since he and Lumen once shared a body, it caused her image pulse to gain autonomy and maintain her form indefinitely. But we all know the real reason. I've never seen a Megu Sakutagawa album magically show up on a shelf. Anyway, passive image pulses replace equipment and abilities for both characters, while skill image pulses work as Kieran's healing, slight buffs, and special attacks that she uses mid-stage. We have song pulses as well if you want to lock down what song plays, but I haven't unlocked many of them yet. Image pulses are nifty pieces of fan service that replace equipment in a fun way. Instead of requiring you to find tons of materials to make equipment, you now have a random gacha-like pull every time you complete a stage. On the menus of each stage, there's a list to see what you're missing, which is good because there's a fuck ton in each of them. Every character from Gunvolt 1, 2, and 3 have at least 2 image pulses, with adepts having 2 for their transformed version and 2 for their human form. A majority of the skill IPs are just attacks and they're helpful in a pinch, but after I unlocked more passive and buff healing IPs, I stepped away from using them since you don't get kudos with them. Some of the better ones, like Xion's, restores a shit ton of health and fetters gauge, or another like Lola's gives you a barrier for a bit. Some of the really high tier ones I don't quite have yet. Moving to passive IPs, you got tons of freedom. Once you reach level 60, you can equip 8 at a time, and I'd say this is where you as a player get creative. Many of the IPs have returning equipment abilities like double jump, increase kudos gain, or deal more damage, but since there's so many to choose from, they had to come up with way more than I could list. It's such a fun system. I hope they can come up with a plot reason to keep passive IPs no matter who's starring in future games, because it's definitely my favorite equipment system in the series. I'm not wild about the skill IPs, I guess they can drop those ones. EX weapons and SP skills beat them out for me any day. Getting to stages, GV3 probably has the best looking ones in the series. As it's on newer hardware, this is the first mainline Gunvolt game that can take advantage of next-gen lighting effects, backgrounds, and all the other stuff I praised about X1 and 2. Not only that, most of the stages went back to the night-lit aesthetics from Gunvolt 1 and 2, and it looks amazing. If I'm to pick my favorites, then it's honestly just all of the first 4 in terms of aesthetics. BB's Christmas City and Sheeran's arcade look like concept art of Gunvolt 1 come to life, the greenish water and rain in Apollo's shipyard scrapyard makes the enemies and player sprites pop out, and running through Cayman's pink Japanese aesthetic just feels right with Kieran's Shinto and Buddhist roots. It's an aesthetic I dig quite a bit, especially because it tells us something about our bosses other than what relates to their theming. Arcade for Shiron means gamer, BB in the Christmas city to get dates, Cayman's a traditional Japanese delinquent type, and Apollo likes marine biology. Then our second half goes for a mix of environmental and mechanical aesthetics. In one, we return to the ship we fought Apollo, but with fire and ice destroying his temperament, a factory overrun with fumes, and just to stick out, a desert stage that's during the brightest hours of the day. They match our second set of bosses, just not as much as the first. Now my favorite part about them is that the dragons actually help in each level. Things like Cayman fighting the mid-boss before us, or Shiron giving intercom help. Actions that make the dragon saviors feel like a real team. Stage mechanics is where GV3 gets a bit hit or miss. Some I like, such as the quickly closing doors in Shiron stage. They're an engaging way to get players comfortable with the arc chain, since you need to hit these candles behind them before the door closes, and if you miss, you just need to hit the door a few times. It's a fine, not too dangerous situation to get comfy. There's also the changing tide in Apollo stage that forces you to keep a steady rhythm with your tags. But then there's a stealth stage in the forest. I don't like this one. Whenever one of the enemies spot you, they rapid fire a fuck ton of bullets your direction, and dodging them at some points feels next to impossible. Maybe I'll find an appeal with more practice, but at this moment I don't like it. After rescuing the 4 primal dragons, Shiron spots 4 rogue missiles heading straight through Japan's barrier, and they send Kirin and Gunvolt to stop them. So we've got a stage where you run up 4 different missiles, which should be based as fuck, but everything's tilted diagonally and it just, After destroying the rocket's power sources, the two are met with the main villain of Gunvolt 3, named Zed, with an omega afterwards, but it's not pronounced. Zed represents both the Sun Tarot card and the Vermilion Bird of the South, which is comparable to a phoenix, hence why he has the Septima of nuclear fusion. And to round it out, Kirin actually sort of represents the secret 5th Chinese mythical beast, the Center Yellow Dragon. I say sort of because her name and design actually comes from a related mythical beast known as the Chilan, that of course got renamed Kirin once put to Korean and Japanese because of their LNR thing. Kirin's connection to the Yellow Dragon is kinda muddy in my quick research, but the basic summary to put in a video about an action platform game is that the Yellow Emperor, a central figure in Chinese legend, saw a Chiran as well as a phoenix before his death, while the Yellow Dragon itself is often regarded as the state of immortality that the Yellow Emperor achieved. I mean, myths of the Chiran are a lot more varied than those of the 4 mythical beasts, but using my favorite, which was a Vietnamese feng shui depiction of their statues representing high aspirations and determination. One that I think fits Kirin, as she herself aims to save everyone without murder, and in a meta sense aspires to become the main character. Back on topic, Zed has his own terrorist group called Attempts, consisting of his harem and many foot soldiers that plan to raid Japan and steal what's known as the Binding Brands, 4 swords that the glaives were originally based on, and are currently placed by Shadow Yakumo at specific places in Japan on top of dragon veins to keep the country's spiritual defenses intact. Now the way Zed could get into Japan is thanks to a Thames member, Layla, using her Septima, known as the Jin, to watch Kirin and her team. Jin has actually occasionally come by to revive bosses you defeat because for a currently unexplained reason, Jin has the same powers as Lumen. Anyways, the missiles actually don't have any explosives since they were just used to sneak attempts in Japan, and now it's time for the second half of the game. Stop Zed's higher-ups from stealing the Binding Brands. Since I've already talked about stages as a whole, I know usually I go in depth with all the bosses, but no matter how they sugarcoat it, I know the Attempts Knights are just the designer's fetishes. All of them are legal-age women, and I'm not being fooled this time. Technically, they all continue with the tarot card theming from before and have an elemental spirit that matches their stage theming, but come on. Gradzi is a short-stacked southerner, Sistine is a MILF, Prado is heavy bisexual energy, and Serpentine is making some of you want to get stepped on. Do not argue with me, I've seen Hatakeyama's personal Twitter, I know what artists like, and I like it too. Hey, so quick warning pause, everything here up until post-game I've rewritten the day after my initial recording. Inti decided to alter the ending during the Steam release, and that caused me to reevaluate the final act. I initially had some negative shit written, and it's a bit more neutral, so bear with me here. While we defeated each of the Attempts members, they still get off with the Binding Brands and can enact their plan. First, they hijack the media tower from Miyoto's stage in Gunvolt 1 and use the Jin's power to cause all Sumeragi adepts to collapse, with Lumen preventing it from harming the Dragon Saviors. At the same time, Zed turns that media tower into a full-on sandcastle that the entire team is going to attack, besides Shiran who stays behind as backup.
Hell yeah!
Zed's castle, more than any other final area, tries to have a big sense of finality to it. We're revisiting a level from Gunvolt 1. It's by far the largest final area in the series, and everyone is here. BB, Cayman, Apollo, GV, Lumen, Daytona. What? So one of Atem's bosses, Serpentine, has the power to create physical illusions of someone's memories. Serpentine's fight in her stage implemented the dragons, while the mid-bosses in the castle go on to create double battles. One against Tenjin and Zonda, another against Iota and Daytona, secret DLC boss against Matic and Teseo, and there's one more that's about to come out against Shiden by himself. And I gotta say, it's weird hearing the former four in English, although Marik and Teseo go undubbed, likely because they couldn't find the perfect English gremlins. These bosses exist to cause Gunvolt to question his past actions. Did he do right by stopping Shiden's plan to protect Japan when Xion still died? Was locking himself up with Sumeragi after finding a life with Quinn right? Did he screw up by following Asimov for so long? Gunvolt's past is haunting him, and he wants to know if he can atone for it. Which seems like a weaker retread of Gunvolt 2, where he had to find acceptance with Xion's passing. Like, Gunvolt 3 often paints Gunvolt as a bad guy at one point, but he's not. Even if we talk about when he worked for Asimov, he divorced himself from Asimov's goals the moment he felt a moral misalignment with them. It's a portrayal I don't quite agree with, that I can also see why everyone would think of GV this way. As we all know, history is written by the victors, and every member of GV3's cast was not born when Gunvolt locked himself away. So there perhaps is an idea that society has normalized Gunvolt's actions as mistakes, and that attitude is making Gunvolt think the same. Sumeragi or someone else has put Gunvolt's stories as those of wrong. Although GV3 never shows this as the case, I just want to fill in an aspect I feel dully explored. Once we catch up to Zed and Layla, he invites us to another room to yet again lore dump at us, cause it's a Gunvolt game. Zed takes us to a new room with 6 glaives holding a baby dragon in place. Said dragon, Moebius, is the real king of the primal dragons. In 2 other vague post scenes before this, Zed referred to him as the Child of Hope, and is actually the main reason they came to Japan. Sumeragi held Moebius in the same 1,000 glaive basement as Gunvolt, just in another room that was untouchable as long as the binding brands were in place. In their ever-growing incompetence, Sumeragi kept him locked up since he had a power above Septimo's and primal dragons. Moebius has an Octima. Specifically, his power is to bend fate so that it follows any possible future he sees. And as an addition to that, if he wakes up at all, an uncountable number of primal dragons would arise and destroy society. Zed's plan is to use Layla's Jinn to influence a sleeping Moebius into rebirthing the world into Zed's utopia, obviously playing into his Phoenix motif. GV can't see much difference between Zed and Shiden's plans, leading to an obvious boss fight birthed by PTSD. I had a lot of complaints right here originally, but the new update does do away with those, so let's ignore it. As you can guess, Moebius wakes up after beating Zed, and we get yet another raw final battle. Gunvolt has not fumbled with a final boss for me yet, and this is no exception. In his first phase, we get sent to an alternate plane of existence where we need to arc chain all of his orbs around him to open his actual hitbox. It resembles Shiden's encounter, but catered towards GV3's mechanics. Getting more cool at this point where you climb up a fuck ton of these orbs. And as cool as that is, phase 1 isn't the part everyone's talking about. After you beat Moebius, he fuses himself with Gunvolt to unleash all of the powers of the Azure Striker and its dragon energy. Something Gunvolt wanted to stop since Moebius has been flashing visions of GV destroying the world into his head. Gunvolt fears that the only way to stop him is by asking Kirin to kill him. But since Kirin doesn't kill, she's motivated to save GV. She's partnered with him all game, and seeing GV die would be the worst thing Gunvolt could do to Kirin, which is why she aims to save him from Moebius.
You must keep on fighting!
Kirin's power on its own doesn't stand up to GV at all. So Zed offers the power of his own Septima and the Jinn to stop Morbful, because he sets out some broken ass moves. Tons of voltaic chains, giant ass astrospheres, arc chaining everywhere. He is powerful. Which brings us to how we stop that power. To depending on how you fight him, decides GV's fate. If you battle like a normal boss, Gunvolt takes hold just long enough to shove himself through Kieran's sword. He dies in her arms, he dissipates into the ether, she cries, cut to credits. Our non-canon bad ending. For the good ending, you need to do this. Gunvolt himself isn't the real guy you damage. Instead, Moebius pops up at certain points to tank some hits. Instead of hitting him with your sword, only use talismans to get the true ending. Kieran locks the Primal Dragon and Moebius together as one entity, he turns into a ball of light, and zooms out into space. Cut then to Kieran and the Shadow Dragons saving Primal Dragons, Atems returning to their home country, which they never clarify, but I've assumed Saudi Arabia, and then credits. A vague ending that answers nothing about Moebius or the visions Gunvolt saw. Now where the new update fixes it. Right as Kieran seals GV and Morbius, there's a new scene where Moebius and Gunvolt talk to each other. Moebius informs Gunvolt that the vision of him destroying the world wasn't Mobius's plan. Rather, it's what would have happened if Mobius didn't intervene. And if the bad ending occurred, Kieran would have gone into her own spiral of self-doubt, preventing her from uniting the world. With Kieran's representation of the Yellow Dragon, I can see why she'd be the one to unite the world, especially as she did bring a revitalized hope to the 4 Primal Dragons, so maybe they're going down that route for the future. All this implies that Mobius wanted Zed to kidnap him, knew that Gunvolt would be there, kept their power at a state that Kieran could stop, and maybe, just maybe, Inti might still know how to tell a story. We'll have to see with episode Atems and future entries. Anyway, Gunvolt entrusts the future with Kieran and the dragons, and during the credits we get to watch the Mob Volt ball fly into space. Additionally, if you pause at just the right moment, we get to see that Gunvolt has turned into a baby again. Before the new scene, I hated this, like with a paragraph of hate, though I've cooled down on it a little bit. I initially thought this was them completely writing off Gunvolt, though now I'm thinking the story is completely set on reuniting Kieran and Gunvolt. Will it be good? We'll have to wait and see. I'm still disappointed with Gunvolt 3's ending, just not as much as some others. Longtime fans had a lot of theories about how this connected to X2, the original X, or the first 2 Gunvolts, and it just doesn't. As is, I think it's okay with the new edition, but I don't see a reason to harp on it any further. I'd rather talk about where the series can go from here after getting to a few bonuses in Gunvolt 3. Gunvolt 3 has the most post-game of any entry. Already there's the mountain of image pulses to find, plus some they added as DLC that's free if you download during release and only $2 afterwards. You also get a hard mode that caps your HP and changes boss patterns, as well as a very hard mode that nullifies nearly every passive image pulse and makes the skill pulses 1 use per stage. So far, I've had tons of fun with both of them. Kieran and GV's base movesets make the limitations not too excruciating, and I'll likely come back to them from time to time. Additionally, you unlock an image pulse that lets you start a stage as Gunvolt, and if you beat the stage without turning into Kieran, you earn an SS rank. Getting this to happen is still hard as balls, but still fun enough to keep going. Reaching the boss as GV really ain't that hard, but beating them is the nightmare. If you reach them with anything less than max fetters, you might as well start over. I'm not gonna rush into this option, but I might come back from time to time. Now, the free DLC they'll be adding up through December is where they're really trying to add substance. The DLC y'all recommended me to wait for was the Atems DLC in December, but like I said, scheduling reasons just made that hard. If it significantly changes my opinion, I'll do a video in January since I have schedule conflicts that'll make a long video hard to produce. If not, then I might just talk about it on Twitter or a text post. First of all, Kieran gets a second style that changes her up a bit called Kieran XX. It gives her infinite shotgun talismans and crazy ass sword shit for buffs, though you can't image pulse and you inflict less damage to balance it out. It's something I'll probably put a lot of use into during very hard mode. There's also a trial mode that's about the same as Gunvolt 2, and the real cream of the crop so far, Denizer mode. I didn't get into this because it happened once in my actual playthrough, but when Lumen revives you in GV3, Gunvolt comes out as an absolutely unhinged Primal Dragon. Astrofury replaces his flash field, instantly locks onto everything, and can Lux Caliber as he wishes. So in Denizer mode, you have to go through the entire game as Gunvolt with the same stipulations as the main game, but you can turn into the Anthem mode whenever you want. Only drawback is that if the Denizer percentage reaches 100 or the fetters reach 0, your run stops. Yet again, the best way I can describe it is fun, and the way you can upgrade GV in it keeps it from getting too tedious. That covers Gunvolt 3. Did I enjoy it? Yeah, definitely. It's got flaws, but I had enough fun that I can look past everything, besides to the large extent they rebooted. I could harp on what to fix with Gunvolt 3, but I don't think there's a point in doing that. In Inti's spirit of always doing something new, I want to talk about what I want to see from the future of Gunvolt. First of all, a lot of y'all are putting some hope into episode attempts, and let's be real, it's not doing all that. But I'll say what I kind of want to see. Big part is explaining how Layla has a cyber diva-like power. Since Xiao locked it away, it could have something to do with him since his potential as a character has still been locked away. And it's not like Inti totally forgot him. There's a secret joke ending where you see Matil as a Maho shoujo with Xiao right in the back. But I'll mostly ignore attempts since whatever I say will be disproven in 2 months. For my main thoughts, I want to see a game with Miyazawa as the full director from the start. While he was initially just the action director, Gunvolt 3's credits actually have him as director, with Suda as series director, and I think that's a better way to go about the future. Suda is getting up there in age, and he still has his responsibility as Inti's vice president on top of everything. I think if Miyazawa doesn't start from a messy base passed on to him, we could get something fresh with Kirin. Because again, I don't hate Gunvolt 3 or X2, I just think there's missed potential in both of them. So what I want that follow-up to be. Kirin needs her own game that maintains her supporting cast. Kirin is much more of an open canvas than Gunvolt or Copen. She doesn't have a major story arc or any real change, and in terms of storytelling, that sets them up to do whatever they want in the next game, which I'd recommend they don't call Gunvolt 4. It's like a reverse of how I felt with Gunvolt. They threw him into Gunvolt 3 while tossing out what had happened, disappointing those who followed his complete journey, while Kirin is not locked to anything besides hopefully her supporting cast. Just find a way to explain why Kirin keeps all of her abilities and we're good. If they want to put in a second playable character, again, I think Xiao would be a good choice. We can sidestep that time gap by saying his Septima is actually tortoise related and he ages slowly. Xiao not only has the open-ended story potential Kirin has, he's the key player in the biggest cliffhanger from Gunvolt 2. And speaking of cliffhangers, let's talk about both Copens. I'm not holding my breath on main universe Copen coming back. Like I said earlier, I only see 2 routes for him. Make him in line with X-Copen, or have him go even crazier. So unless we get a Xiao midquel between GV2 and 3, he's probably out of the picture. Now, for an X3, I don't think that's entirely off the table yet. While X2 has issues, I'd be cool with a third if bullet dashing is fixed and the EX weapons have the flow of X1. Copen's Razor Wheel has interdimensional travel, so they could theoretically make a game in yet another universe, or even one where you jump to multiple. The Copen from X as well has lots of story potential at the moment. Now, the big aspect I'd want from it is to keep Kohaku and Null with him, just because I'm really tired of the supporting cast changing all the time. Yet again, I don't think Gunvolt 3 and X2 are marks that Gunvolt needs to end. Rather, I think they're 2 games that have loads of potential they didn't quite reach. And I'd love to see if Inti can match that next time. Thank you all for tuning into this video, and I assume the first one as well. It's been a real experience finally playing these games after all this time, and an even more engaging experience for me making these 2 long-ass videos about it. Especially this second one, which is the first one I actually made on a set schedule, so that was quite an experience. Like I said, unless episode attempts has something really special, I don't see myself doing a Gunvolt video again for a while, just because I'm out of games. I'd like to eventually cover Blaster Master Zero and Dragon Mark for Death, but the latter will require scheduling with friends since I feel it's intended for multiplayer. Either way, I hope enough of you who tuned in stick around for what I've got coming next.